with personality change, a lot of it is going to feel very unnatural at first. But the thing that makes it feel natural over time is the repetition. And the fact that you kind of, once you see yourself acting a certain way, you incorporate that into your self-identity. So if you have never volunteered before, but suddenly you start volunteering a lot and you signed up and people count on you to show up every Saturday or whatever, you're going to start to see yourself as a volunteer, even though that wasn't ever part of your identity before.
Yeah, I love the idea that we learn about who we are by observing what we do. You know, like if we watch other people doing things, we think, oh, that person's the sort of person that does this. Same with ourselves. Like, you know, if we observe ourselves doing a, you know, something kind for somebody else, it's sort of like a tiny bit of evidence that, oh, I'm a kind person, you know, and then it's all about then just building an evidence base for a certain type of person or a certain type of character. Something I've heard you say that I find really interesting was, you know, personality is something that helps us to pursue our goals. And to me, the implication of that is that goals shape our personality, not that our personality should shape our goals. And that's a really, really important idea, I think.
Yeah, so this is something that I heard from Nate Hudson, who's one of the main researchers on personality change. And that's sort of his twist on the definition of personality. But if you think about it, we all have goals in life that we are always trying to pursue. How many times have you gotten an email at work that you wish you could respond like, what the fuck are you talking about? You know, but you would never say that because you have a goal of not getting fired or like of being a good employee. And so you say something more professional. And, you know, so I think personality change is the same in that you identify these bigger plans or bigger projects you have for your life. And then you kind of start to act in ways that make them more achievable. And that's kind of what personality change is all about, is that you have these North Stars that you're going for, and you kind of nudge yourself to act in ways that help you achieve those goals. And it came through in a lot of the interviews that I did with people who became more conscientious in particular. You know, they sort of earlier in their life, like didn't know, like, why should you study for a test, or why should you turn things in on time, or why should I be on time at all? But then they had some big goal, like starting a business, or, you know, one of them wanted to become an academic, or they had something they really wanted. And then that encouraged them to be more conscientious.
Okay, Olga, welcome to the show. Now, to get started, can you just tell us what got you interested in writing a book on the science of personality change?
Yeah, so a few years ago, I had done a magazine assignment about personality change. And for that, I had tried some techniques to change my own personality. And I thought it would just be like kind of a silly gimmick and I would leave it behind after I was done with the assignment. But I actually found that I really enjoyed and felt better after I tried some of the strategies. So, to name just one example, one thing that I did for that article is join an improv class. And that's probably the least likely thing that I ever thought I would do. I am just not a natural improviser. That's not my kind of natural personality at all. I'm not like funny or attention seeking. And I joined this class and I thought I would just kind of grit my teeth through it. But I actually just really liked it. It made me feel a lot better. On days that I went to the class, I just felt this like, I don't know, just buoyancy and kind of happiness that I didn't have in my day-to-day life. And I think that's because I realized that sometimes acting outside of our nature, or doing things that you wouldn't necessarily expect to align with your natural personality, actually do benefit us. And so I wanted to explore that in greater depth.
That's very interesting. How would you say your inner experience of life is different now from before when you the book, before you wrote the book? And you tell a story in the book of, you know, it's an introduction where you were in Miami and you had to get some photos taken and you got a haircut. Maybe tell us about this.
Yeah. So the story that I tell in the book, kind of to explain how neurotic I was. So neuroticism is the personality trait that's associated with anxiety and depression. So this is a day that is not going to sound very bad, and that's kind of the point. So I I'm in Miami, and for my work, I need to get a professional photo of myself taken. And all sorts of small bad things happen on the way to this photo shoot. Like, um, I get a bad haircut. I get stuck in traffic. At one point, I park in this parking garage and I can't find my car afterward. And it just kind of, when small things like that happen, it really starts to throw me for a loop and I get really discombobulated. And then I go to this photo shoot. The photo shoot doesn't go well. I'm leaving the photo shoot and I get stuck in more traffic. And then I have this problem at the grocery store where my cart locks and I can't move my cart, get it all the way to my car. So I end up having to just drag all these groceries across the parking lot. And I kind of just have a breakdown. Like, it just is so stressful and frustrating. It feels like nothing is going right. And I'm just kind of, in this Airbnb sobbing and, kind of telling my boyfriend at the time that I don't want kids because I can't handle anything and everything is so hard. Um, and that's kind of an example of how, even when relatively small and meaningless things would go wrong, I kind of would melt down because of this very high level of neuroticism that I had. And I just had trouble kind of keeping perspective or kind of being able to shrug off um, annoying things or just things that weren't going my way. And so that's kind of one of the key things that I wanted to work on.
And now, were you able to actually, you know, make some big changes in your personality? Like, is there a big before and after here? Like, what's your experience of life now, particularly with your relationship with neuroticism?
Yeah. So I would say that, so one of the biggest things that I did for neuroticism is I took this meditation class. And I don't know if the meditation per se worked because it was 45 minutes of meditating a day for something like 6 or 8 weeks or something. And on top of that, we had this class that we met all together. It was a Zoom class where we would meet and kind of talk about um, concepts in Buddhism that might help reduce anxiety and depression. And one of the things that my teacher would say that stuck out to me, and again, this is going to sound stupidly simple, was just things happen that you don't like. Um, and, in this class, we would all talk about our frustrations or things that weren't going well or, just things that we wish were different. So one person had chronic pain. Another person um, was, I think, like postpartum. And so was kind of struggling with that. Another person had to take some time off work because of an injury. So a lot of people were dealing with something where it's like, I really wish this hadn't happened. And now my life is not really going the way I want. And kind of what I started to realize is that you're not responsible for everything in your life going perfectly. Like, a lot of people have misadventures or just annoying stuff that happens or things that don't go according to plan. And uh, it's not a sign that you're a failure if those things happen to you. It's not a character flaw, I guess. And so that actually made me better able to handle those types of challenges, and it helped reduce my neuroticism because I can now notice when I have this like cascade of problems and it's like, okay, this is just something I'm going to have to deal with. I didn't cause this. I didn't make it happen. This is just one of those things that happens to people. Things happen that we don't like. Just as a small example, literally today, you guys have Starbucks in the UK, right? Yeah. Okay. So we have Starbucks here. I order from Starbucks a lot, and it's like a very busy Starbucks near my house. And there's only one, and for this whole town that I live in. And I order the Starbucks, and I'm trying to pick up my Starbucks and then get my son to school, kind of in quick succession. So I order the Starbucks, take off, get to the Starbucks. They have my food, but not my drink. And I'm like, okay, I'll just wait a couple of minutes. But I really have to get my son to school. And I kind of wait, go back in. The drink is still not out. I'm like, okay, I'm going to take him to school, then come back to the Starbucks, pick up my drink, and then go. I take him to school. I go back to the Starbucks. I wait for my drink. It's still not there. It's been like an hour now since I've ordered. I'm trying to get anyone's attention. Like they're not looking at me because they're so busy. I'm like, hey, can I just get a refund of my drink? Like, you don't even have to make it, just literally anything. They're like, no, they're like, we're on it. Okay, we'll make it right now. Like, I had like three different check-ins with these Starbucks people. Like, hey, can you make it now? Like, okay, yeah, we're on it. And so basically, like, literally an hour and 15 minutes after I ordered my drink, I got it. This is also my first coffee of the day. So anyone who is a coffee drinker knows, like, it's very hard to get things done before you have your coffee. And I kind of like, that is the kind of thing that would have really sent me for a spiral. I think before I did this experiment, and today it was just like, okay, that sucked. I'm going to not order from Starbucks at that time again because that was crazy. But honestly, like, it ultimately wasn't that big a deal. I was able to do some work or whatever while I waited. And I get that like a lot of people might just have come to that situation with that mentality in the first place. But what I'm saying is that I did not. I had to get there through personality change.
So it sounds like in the past you would have looped on that like all day afterwards, whereas now you can more just sort of shake it off and move on.
Yeah, like, what is it about me that did I order a weird drink that they like didn't know how to make? Did I, what is it, like, why did we pick this place to live that has this Starbucks that doesn't function well? Like, it's just, I would have really dwelled on it. Yeah.
You mentioned there about the meditation class. I'm aware you went deep into Buddhism in your research for this book. How did that change your relationship to striving?
Yeah. So in Buddhism, you are really not supposed to strive. Like, that's considered not very Buddhist, in at least the interpretation of Buddhism that this class followed. So you're supposed to just kind of accept whatever is. And that's really the antithesis of my job specifically, but a lot of jobs that people have today. Like, it's like, most people could not be Buddhist monks because you would get fired from your job. And I really had trouble reconciling that. Like, how are you supposed to, get it done before the deadline and, fit everything in if you're really not supposed to be striving? And kind of what I realized is that you can still strive. You can still try to do everything you can do, within the time allotted or within the time that you have. But you kind of have to let go of the outcome of the striving. So it's more about like releasing your attachment to how all that striving works out. So if you push really hard and it doesn't really quite work out how you expected, to release some of the self-blame and the self-criticism that I think a lot of neurotic people struggle with when they don't see the outcomes that they wanted.
So it sort of helped to free you from outcomes and more just get joy from actually the actions you're taking and yeah, not be so I need to achieve this for my sense of self to feel okay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, uh, I have a toddler, so we're always working on milestones. So, like, walking, or before that, like rolling over, sitting up by yourself, and like, nothing really teaches you about striving versus outcomes. Like having a toddler, because he would go to physical therapy or whatever for many, many weeks and work on walking, and he was a very late walker. He just didn't start walking until way late. And I just kind of had to realize at some point, we can do everything we can. We can show up at PT and we can try and we can strive and practice, but he's going to walk when he's going to walk.
Yeah, on that, in the Miami example earlier, you mentioned that you said to your partner at the time that I don't want to have kids because of this or whatever, and then you ended up obviously having a child. Did writing this book influence your decision on parenting at all, and the decision actually to become a parent?
Yeah, it did. I think it made me realize that I have the capacity to handle a lot more stress than I feared, I guess. So, how to put this? Um, I think in the beginning, I really thought that if you feel stress, um, you have too much stress in your life and you need to reduce the stress no matter what. Like you need to reduce the number of stressful things that you take on. So if you have to get to a friend's birthday party and then you have to file a story and then you have to pick up your groceries or whatever, and that's too many things in one day, you need to like let one of them go. And sometimes that is the answer. Like sometimes you just are overextended. But kind of what I learned through this process, and it was in part by talking to this psychologist, Tracy Dennis Tawari, is that, and very similar to my Buddhist teacher, is that stressful things are going to happen. And part of handling anxiety or handling your level of neuroticism is being able to handle the stress. It's your ability to weather those stressful things. And so kind of like sometimes being afraid of the stress or being scared that you're feeling stress is actually more harmful than just letting it happen. Okay, I was like, I don't know if I can handle the stress of having a child, right? It's very stressful. But what I realized throughout this process is that it's kind of like a game on mentality that is useful to have in life. Like yes, the stress is going to come at you and the key to being less neurotic is not to feel less stress, but just to be able to like ride that wave, to be able to tolerate the stress. And that it's okay if I have a child and I still feel that it is stressful. Like that's not a sign of bad parenting. It's not a sign that you shouldn't have had a child. It's not a sign that you're way too neurotic. It's a sign that everything is going well as long as you're able to handle it. You're able to get through the day and persevere and, go like after the bedtime routine, even if you were really stressed during it.
Yeah, a phrase that I always keep top of mind now is just like whenever something like that does happen, I just say to myself, it's part of the fun, it's part of the game, and you just have to accept it. Why, when you're writing a book, it's going to take years of research and thought and everything else as well, and you obviously wanted to make these changes to your life. Why focus on personality? Like how much does personality influence our outcomes in life? Would you say?
Yeah. So a lot of people have asked me this, why not how to make more money or how to, get smarter or whatever. So first I would say a lot of things that we don't think are personality actually. So things like getting organized or, all those books like Atomic Habits or um, any book that deals with organization or habit change is personality change. That's conscientiousness. It's a trait that has to do with orderliness and dutifulness. All the books about relaxing and not getting too irritated, the let them theory, all those, that's neuroticism. Like that's letting go of neuroticism. How to win friends and influence people is agreeableness. All the books about making friends or making conversation is extroversion. So a lot of these things that we're like, oh, I just want to make more friends or I just want to be less, anxious. That's personality change. First of all. Second of all, personality has a big influence on your life. There's some studies that show that some traits of personality have a bigger influence on outcomes like job opportunities or marriage or income than even your IQ or how much money you have. So if you, or how much money you grew up with, sorry. So if you think about it, like we would all love to have a very high IQ and think that that would solve all of our problems. But actually like the trait of conscientiousness predicts better outcomes in some domains than IQ does. So it really is one of those things that's like a superpower. Like if you can optimize on some of these traits, or at least get to a level that you want, you really can achieve some of these outcomes that you thought were maybe only possible if you went to an Ivy League school or had rich parents growing up, or had all these other factors that you have no control over.
For sure, for sure. Slightly random question, but I thought it was interesting to hear that you interviewed a psychopath for the book. What did you learn from your interactions with this gentleman?
So that was an interesting interview. I wanted to see if he. So this is a man who is a self-proclaimed psychopath. He wrote a book in which he calls himself a psychopath. Um, and then he says that he stopped being a psychopath. And the I was trying to talk to him to see if, like, okay, so let's say you have this huge personality change, psychopath to not psychopath. Is that permanent, or do you have to, like, remind yourself every day to not be a psychopath, or how does that work? Like, are you still a psychopath inside, but you just don't act like one? And what he kind of told me is that he still has to work very hard at not being a psychopath. He um, basically has to remind himself to be nice to people. He has to remind himself to be helpful around the house, or to not follow these selfish impulses that he has. And so to him, he was still a psychopath on the inside. He just acted like this nice guy, as he put it. But it was interesting because the people in his life didn't care. Like, they were just like, "Oh, we love how you're acting lately. Like, you're being so nice. Like, oh, it's so cool." Like, and I thought it was like a cool illustration of, like, even if you don't feel like some of these changes are quote unquote genuine, or that you don't think that it's um natural for you to be doing some of this stuff or acting this way, it might still have positive changes in your life regardless, because a lot of personality is just how people perceive you, and not necessarily like what you're instinctually born with.
Yeah, that raises questions about what actually is personality. Is it what how others perceive us to be? Is it our inner experience? Like when someone asks you the question, not the question now, what is personality? How do you define it? What does the word actually mean?
The way psychologists define it is the feelings, thoughts, and behaviors that come most naturally to you. Um, and the way that I would modify that is that naturally depends on your own definition of naturally. So if if it's like, um, it could be naturally because that's what you've always done. It could be naturally because that's what you've decided to do with your New Year's resolutions. It could be naturally because you signed up for the gym, and if you skip a certain number of classes, you lose money or something. It could be something where you're kind of nudged to do it. But it's sort of like these, um, reflexive, impulses that we all have. I would say that with personality change, a lot of it is going to feel very unnatural at first. But the thing that makes it feel natural over time is the repetition, and the fact that you kind of, once you see yourself acting a certain way, you incorporate that into your self identity. So if you have never volunteered before, but suddenly you start volunteering a lot, and you signed up and people count on you to show up every Saturday or whatever, you're going to start to see yourself as a volunteer, even though that wasn't ever part of your identity before.
Yeah, I love the idea that we learn about who we are by observing what we do. Like if we watch other people doing things, we think, oh, that person's the sort of person that does this. Same with ourselves. Like, if we observe ourselves doing something kind for somebody else, it's sort of like a tiny bit of evidence that, oh, I'm a kind person, and then it's all about then just building an evidence base for a certain type of person or a certain type of character. Um, Something I've heard you say that I find really interesting was, you know, personality is something that helps us to pursue our goals. And to me, the implication of that is that goals shape our personality, not that our personality should shape our goals. And that's a really, really important idea, I think.
Yeah, so this is something that I heard from Nate Hudson, who's one of the main researchers on personality change, who I talk about in my book and I interview. And that's sort of his twist on the definition of personality. And it kind of can sound at first a little bit craven, like oh, I have this goal, I'm gonna like shapeshift in order to get it. But if you think about it, we all have goals in life that we are always trying to pursue by whatever means, right? Like if you have a goal of being a great parent to your child, you're going to treat them very warmly and supportively, even if they just threw a bunch of macaroni and cheese on the floor. Like, you're gonna always act a little bit against your first instinct, in order to achieve some overarching plan that you have for your life. How many times have you gotten an email at work that you wish you could respond like, what the fuck are you talking about? But you would never say that because you have a goal of not getting fired or like of being a good employee. And so you say something more professional. And, so I think personality change is the same in that you identify these bigger plans or bigger projects you have for your life. And then you kind of start to act in ways that make them more achievable. And that's kind of what personality change is all about, is that you have these North Stars that you're going for, and you kind of nudge yourself to act in ways that help you achieve those goals. And this, it came through in a lot of the interviews that I did with people who became more conscientious in particular. They sort of earlier in their life, like, didn't know, like, why should you study for a test, or why should you turn things in on time, or why should I be on time at all? But then they had some big goal, like starting a business, or, one of them wanted to become an academic, or they had something they really wanted. And then that encouraged them to be more conscientious. It wasn't just like, I'm going to wake up one day and be a conscientious person. It's like, what do I have to do in order to get this thing that I want?
Yeah, from my own experience, whenever I decided I was going to start my own business, like I gradually became more conscientious. Like I used to be a very, very lazy person, and then I don't really find that's the case anymore. So the goal did change the personality for me. I really like this though, because like whenever you hear about things like the Myers-Briggs and these different personality tests, like I really hate the idea of taking them, because it's just like I'm going to take this test and then I'm going to be that's going to be my label, my little box that I fit into, and that defines what I can and can't do, what I can and can't pursue. Whereas what you're saying is actually the goal is going to shape the person that you become. So choose a different goal, and you could choose a different personality, obviously within reason, within a reasonable bandwidth here. But I really like that. So what conclusions did you come to about those kind of tests, like the Myers-Briggs and things like that?
So people really love the Myers-Briggs, and the Enneagram is another one that's really popular, that's similar. So I don't want to take away anyone's Myers-Briggs category or whatever, if that's really important to them or just something that really helps them in life. Like, I think there is like slight validity to some of the categories in the Myers-Briggs, but really personality scientists and psychologists do not use those tests anymore because they are not very valid. They don't tell us a lot about people or the differences between people or what people will and won't do. Um, so if you've ever taken it, it'll categorize you into like a thinker or feeler, or introvert or extrovert. We all act introverted and extroverted every single day. Like, some of us act slightly more introverted, some of us act slightly more extroverted, but we all are going to exhibit those two qualities in a given day. We're all going to think and feel in a given day. And is there benefit to knowing that you're more of a thinker than a feeler? Maybe it might tell you something about yourself, but most psychologists now think that personality traits are a spectrum. And personality change involves moving along the spectrum of those traits. So you could be, not very conscientious to start, as you described yourself, and then you move along the spectrum of conscientiousness, and maybe you go from 20% conscientious to 80%. I don't know, but you basically, no one is sort of all or nothing. You're all a little bit of everything.
Did you come across um, anything to do with like parts work, or like things like internal family systems therapy during your course of research for this?
I did not. I know that that's very popular now, and it's just not a part of the personality literature at all. And I didn't look at it. And then it sort of like had this big boom right as I was finishing up the book. And I haven't done that kind of therapy, and I don't know much about it. And it just, they don't talk to the personality people at all.
Maybe that could be a new chapter for the next edition. Um, and something else I came across a while ago was something called the Looking Glass Self Theory by a guy called Charles Cooley. Did you come across this?
Yeah, there's like a couple theories called the looking glass self. And the one that I describe in my book is more about how you kind of reflect the people around you. So if you surround yourself with certain types of people like extroverts, then you might become more extroverted because you are kind of reflecting the identities of the people that you spend time around. But I know that there's other looking glass self theories that are slightly different. So that might not be the one that you're thinking of.
The one I was thinking of is the idea that it's we're not who we think we are. We're not who other people think we are, but we are who we think other people think we are. So if people expect us to be a certain way, then that's tend to how we act around them. So for me, for example, I'm from Northern Ireland. I went to university in Scotland, different country. And in school growing up, I would have been quite, I would say, introverted, quite shy. And then whenever I was in Glasgow, nobody knew me. So I was kind of free to sort of like experiment with different ways of being. And I sort of like was like, oh my God, like I feel kind of confident, you know? And I thought, okay, I'm just confident now. And then I went home for Christmas and I went to a party with all of the people that I would have grown up with. And I was like, well, I'll just be confident. And then I went in and I literally like I felt myself shrinking. I felt like I just became the person I had been in secondary school around them. And I was just like, what just happened? You know? So I've always wondered about that since.
Yeah, that's like a really common phenomenon. I think a lot of people have that before they start university is like they leave their hometown and they're like no more nerdy girl or whatever and they start to be I did that too a little bit. Like I kind of took on a new identity I guess in college. And yeah, and then when you return home seeing all those same people that you grew up around can kind of remind you of the way that you used to act or what they might expect, how they might expect you to act. So you might kind of revert back to some of that. That this can happen also with people who visit their parents or their family of origin after a while, where you have your adult life and you're getting brunch and you're kind of this grown up, and then you go home and it's like you're kind of a 14-year-old again, it's like you're like fighting with your mom and kind of just snippy and stuff. And it's because, people can remind you of how you used to be. So yeah, I think there's definitely something to that.
For sure, for sure. I always wonder, can that be leveraged in a positive direction? You know, like if I say, right, I want to be this kind of person, and then if I make some kind of commitment that will be socially reinforced, could that be a powerful tool for change? Does that make sense?
Oh yeah. Like, yeah. Like if in a positive way. So like if you're like, this happened recently when I ran a race and I'm not a good runner, but um everyone was running and it felt weird to stop running, like because there were so many people behind me. And so I just kind of ran the whole race, even though I was really tired and I don't really enjoy running that much. And everyone was like at the end, like, wow, you're such a great runner. Like, yeah, like you did it. Like you must do this all the time. And I was like, not really. I just kind of felt peer pressured to like keep going. So I think there's like elements of that in other settings where you're like, I didn't really mean to be acting this way, but now I'm kind of on a roll.
So can you give us an overview of the big five, the ocean?
Yeah. Most psychologists think that personality can be described with five main traits. Openness to experiences, which is sort of like open mindedness and creativity and verbal fluency. So conscientiousness, which is once again like timeliness, dutifulness, meeting deadlines, being organized, things like that. Extroversion, and this is enjoying being around people and talking to people. Um, Agreeableness, which is more than extroversion. It's like being very kind and considerate to other people and very empathetic. And then neuroticism, which is anxiety and depression. The opposite of neuroticism is this trait called emotional stability. So these are people who shit happens and they're just like, it's fine. Like I can handle it. Like they are smooth sailors. Like they do not get ruffled easily.
Cool, cool. And I think you mentioned at the start of the conversation that there's great value in, like, we've all got these kind of natural strengths and tendencies, but there's potentially great value and great growth in going to the places where you might not naturally gravitate.
Yeah. So this is sort of like the where I don't know, diverge from a lot of self-help people, I guess. Is that I think a lot of modern day self-help is like figure out who you really are and then do the thing that like aligns best with that, right? Like if you're an introvert, get a job as an accountant who's never going to talk to anyone. And there's actually a lot of research showing that occasionally acting outside your nature, occasionally doing things that make you a little bit uncomfortable has a big benefit. It can be a positive thing. Extroversion is actually a really good example of this. So in studies where they ask, so they'll ask people, how introverted are you? People will say, I'm very introverted. I'm the most introverted you can be. And they're like, okay, go act extroverted for a few minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Go just do whatever you think an extrovert would do. And then they go usually talk with a group of people because that's extroversion in everyone's mind. And then the then they come back to the researcher and the researcher is like, how do you feel? And the introvert is like, I feel amazing. That was great. Like, I feel more like myself and I feel happier. So here they are doing something that doesn't align at all with their stated personality trait of introversion. They're having fun and talking to people, and then they feel better and they also feel more like themselves. So that kind of goes to show that sometimes these stories that you tell yourself about yourself are not completely accurate, or at least they can become exaggerated to the point where you're kind of not really doing anything outside your comfort zone because you're trying to stick to your story.
Hmm. So part of personality change is like being able to step outside of that story into a bigger world, a more expansive one.
Yeah, exactly. Or just to let go of the story. Like a lot of people that I talk to, um, I'm so sorry. Uh, a lot of people that I talk to for conscientiousness seemed reluctant to be more conscientious, especially in school, because they always saw themselves, or one guy in particular saw himself as like this party guy who loved to drink and didn't like studying, and that was his identity. And it kind of required letting go of that identity in order to get the grades and the test scores that he needed in order to become an academic, which he did. But he just wasn't going to be able to stick with this story of I'm a easygoing party guy and also, crush the GRE, which you have to in order to get into the schools that he wanted to get into. So yeah, I mean, sometimes it's almost like just saying like, okay, that maybe used to be me, or that's an element of myself, but it's not going to be who I am for the next, whatever year.
What when I ask you the question, who are you at the most basic level? What is your most basic sense of self? What do you identify with? What comes to mind?
Are you asking me specifically, or like a person?
You specifically.
Oh, okay. Um, yeah, so this is interesting. I would say that my first instinct answer to that question was a writer. Um, and then which is interesting because most mothers say mother first. I guess yeah, I would say like writer and mother. But I'm also like a wife, and I'm also a friend, and I'm also like an occasional rollerblader, and like we all have a lot of identity points to draw on. So I mean, I don't know. Usually just don't self-describe myself very much. Um, yeah, in my Twitter bio, I think it just says the Atlantic.
Yeah, I'm the same. Like, but I was out for a run the other day, and the thought occurred to me. I was like, if you're going to identify with anything, like anything at all, because I usually don't like, sort of putting myself in a box. But if you are going to identify with something, like potential, like if you just say, I am what I could be, or I am potential, then it's just like it's very freeing. Like you're not put into a certain box. Then, um, something I want to ask you about was what you discovered about psychedelics and personality change. Like, how can psychedelics be leveraged in a positive way here?
Yeah, so I have to say the research on psychedelics is bad. Like it's not very strong. Like the state of the evidence is weak. So everything I'm about to say is in the context of the fact that these studies have a few hundred people at most. And there's no way to really blind the participants. And the participants have to enroll in the studies themselves because you can't give people psychedelics without them knowing that they're taking them. So grain of salt over all of this. However, what we know about how psychedelics work is that they seem to increase the trait of openness to experiences. And that increase seems to bring down depression and anxiety and rumination in people. So it kind of seems to like turn down the neuroticism, and which is how you get those studies where people seem like they get over their PTSD or their depression after they take psychedelics. It's not because it makes them like a lot happier. It's because it seems to like change the way they look at their situation or their life. And the way one psychedelic researcher described it to me is it's sort of like so you're on this psychedelic trip and it kind of like takes you uh, takes you on this like helicopter ride over this like beautiful mountain and you can see the summit and you can see the trail going down from the start of the mountain and you can see all the obstacles in the way, and then when you're done with the psychedelic trip you can kind of it makes it more worthwhile, I guess, to climb up the mountain, or you can kind of see where you're going, or just at least like see your problems in this grander scale, that make this like arduous summiting process like more worth it. So to me, it kind of just suggests that they somehow, briefly at least, increase openness to experiences, and that increase does something beneficial to people who have gotten just stuck in a loop of like, my life is bad, everyone is bad, everything is dangerous. Which is it tends those tend to be the sorts of problems that people in psychedelic studies have.
So it sort of gives people a bigger context or a bigger lens through which to view their situation and their problems, and they're sort of like they're outside of them, and
Yes.
that's helpful.
Yes. The way that one psychedelic study participant explained it to me is like she saw like a movie of her life playing and she saw everyone, the people who had wronged her and her family members and her friends and everyone in her life kind of like flashing before her eyes, for lack of a better word, but not in a scary way. And for some reason she was able to kind of like be at peace with a lot of the negative events that had happened to her after kind of getting this new perspective on her life and all the characters in it. I get that that doesn't make perfect sense, and I don't know what to do about that. Like I think it's just something where it works for some people, and this out of body experience like really triggers something healing in them, and then some people it really does not work and they don't have any benefit. It's just one of those things.
Yeah, I think it's very like the response varies so much. Like for me, I had did psychedelics once. I did psilocybin, and it was not a good experience. So I wouldn't do it again after that. But some people have amazing life changing things. Have you tried any yourself?
Yeah, I've tried ketamine, and and I've tried psilocybin, and I wouldn't say that either was life changing, but neither was bad either. Both doses were very small. Um, so I don't know if it's just because these are like really big doses that they're doing in the studies. They're like, you're definitely going to hallucinate. Like, I think one researcher said, like, if um, if I did this at Burning Man, I would zip my ass up in the tent, until the morning, because he's like, I would not want to be wandering around. And I haven't done doses that big, so I don't know what the effect would be on me. I would say that like all of these are the studies that I'm writing about. The person is doing it being monitored by a therapist after a lot of therapy. They're kind of doing it in this very structured way, so it's not just like someone going to Joshua Tree and like with some mushrooms.
Over the course of researching for this book, like, is there anything that you feel was particularly valuable that you discovered, like things that have really stuck with you and you thought, right, that's worth you know keeping with me?
Um, I think one thing that I still think about is this study that I write about in the extroversion chapter. I had a lot of self consciousness, and that was part of my introversion. I think, like, I was kind of like worried about how people were perceiving me and what they were thinking about me, and just especially starting improv, it's very self consciousness inducing because you're doing and saying weird things. And there was this interesting study where they had people. Uh, okay, so they had like a room of people, and they had these study participants, and they had the participants put on a shirt with Barry Manilow's face on it, the singer Barry Manilow, and then they said like go into the room and like and just like walk through the room, and they did, and then they came back and they said how many people do you think uh notice what was on your shirt? And they said like probably everyone, like almost everyone, I don't know, 80%, 90%. And it turned out only like 30% did. Like a very small percentage of these people noticed that they were dressed really weirdly. And I think it just goes to show that like people don't seem to pay close attention to even like our little foibles as we think. Like we are sometimes our worst critics, and even if you say something really strange or do something really strange, um, people might not notice, or they'll probably quickly forget. Which was a very helpful lesson to get through improv. Um, so yeah, I would just encourage people who are experimenting with extroversion in particular to keep that in mind.
I love that. Yeah, like people are just so wrapped up in their own story, their own life, that they just don't have the mental bandwidth to care what you're doing, even if it's extreme, you know? Uh, Conscientiousness, how changeable do you think this actually is? I think you talk about the story of a guy, Zach Hambrick. He was a professor of psychology. Can we share Zach's story?
Yeah, so Zach is the one that I've been referencing a few times. So he started out as this guy who's like party guy, loves to drink, loves to play golf. Made it to college somehow, barely got in. Um, you know, Somehow he gets interested in psychology. Like he has a psychology professor who really inspires him, and he's like, okay, I want to become a psychologist, which involves more than just graduating from college. Like you have to get into a really good grad school, and you have to take a bunch of tests, and you have to really kind of dominate other people, like your intellectual peers. Like you have to be better than a substantial number of people. And this was really hard for him. He had never written a paper before. He had never really studied for a test. And he had to really get down to the essentials of this is how you make note cards. This is how you get through a really tedious and long book that you're going to be quizzed on. This is how you study for a test. He started like really studying really hard, getting really organized, sitting down with a friend and going through their notes and trying to like puzzle through these books that they were reading. And in some cases he overprepared, but he did. He got into a really great grad school, and he became a professor of psychology. And he actually studies like success. Now he studies like how to get better at things, which is, I think, a little bit of me search. But yeah, I thought that was like a really good story because it showed that, you don't have to be someone who's blessed to be, destined to be this like great mind in order to become one. You can just get super organized.
Well, it's another example of the goal shaping the personality, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So you've written an amazing book here, Olga. I was just curious, what what do you think makes for writing a great book? Can you tell us about, your own process for writing this? Obviously, it involves a lot of self experimentation, but how did that actually look in practice? Like, how did you go about doing this?
Yeah, so a lot of what I chose to do is based on Nate Hudson's studies for personality change. So he has like a list of activities that he suggests for people um, to try to change their personalities. I also just read other research that offered some kind of examples of things to do for the various traits. I talked with people who had changed their personality in various ways. I read in millions of studies. It felt like, and this was before, Chat GPT and some of these other tools could just pull like the three most interesting studies on blah blah blah. Like this was like by hand going through the notes and the references. Um, yeah, and I tried to match up like what I've found to be the most effective techniques with what I saw in the research and why I was finding certain things and not other things. And then I, yeah, put it all together. I mean, I can't say it's like it's easy, but it's rewarding. It's fun.
Out of all the different things you did, which had the biggest payoff for you? Was it improv? Which was the biggest had the biggest impact?
Bang for the buck. I would say improv. I would say if anyone is just really like they want to change several things and they're not totally sure what and they don't really know where to start, I would just sign up for an improv class. First of all, because it'll force you to go to something. And we weren't allowed to miss more than two um, classes in order to graduate from our improv class. And it's just a really good experiment in getting up in front of people, being spontaneous and having unexpected things happen, which can be a challenge for people who are really structured and um, introverted. And also in just kind of like letting go of control, kind of like accepting that you can't control the outcome of the scene. You can only do your part of it, but ultimately the scene is going to go the way it's going to go. Yeah, I think it's a good combination of different exercises.
For sure, for sure. Like I've done it myself, and what it teaches you is like it teaches you to do something that you're very afraid to do, and you have no idea whether it's going to go well or not. And what that develops is like amazing self trust. Because then in the future, like if I have to call somebody and I don't know what the outcome is going to be or whatever, I'm still happy. Like I'll just do it anyway. Whereas I have a younger brother, and he's just like, no, I'd never do that. I would never just call someone like that, or just start a random conversation with somebody. So it develops this amazing self trust for yourself.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Yeah, it definitely is like I have done this before. I have made an idiot of myself in front of other people. It was fine. Like, yeah, it does it makes you more confident in a lot of different ways. Not in the like TED Talk competent, business leader, but just day-to-day interactions for sure.
Yeah, and going back to the conscientiousness thing, can you just tell us about the different, like this idea of being a high self monitor if you've got something you're trying to achieve? I think this is really interesting.
Yeah, so high self monitors are people who can kind of adapt their personality um, to suit the situation. So this is someone who, let's say they're very introverted, but they get a promotion opportunity at work, but it involves a lot of public speaking. And they're not initially comfortable with that, but they are sort of like, I want to do this. So I'm going to kind of flex out of my introversion in order to, do the parts of this job that are going to be challenging for me. And I'm going to learn how to do it. And I'm going to kind of fake it till I make it. And so this is sort of like people like this are going to be a little bit better at personality change, or they might even be more likely to take it on. I would consider myself a high self monitor. Um, the low self monitors, if you've ever been at a wedding or at a event like that, and there's someone who's just sitting on their phone and at a table in the back instead of making the awkward small talk that weddings involve, that's a low self monitor. So they're like, I'm not into this. I don't want to be into it. I don't want to try. I don't want to do it. This is not for me. And I'm just not going to go there. So that's someone who's going to totally stick true to whatever they want to do, regardless of the situation.
For somebody listening to this that would love to understand their own personality better and see where they fall on the big five, what assessments would you recommend? Are these things they can do online, or do they need to go somewhere? Like how do you actually get assessed for your personality?
So you can use any Big Five personality test, but the ones that I recommend they're free, and they're Nate Hudson's tests that he put online, and it's at personalityassessor.com. You can take any. He has like a number of them. They just all have different numbers of questions. So the more questions you answer, the more precise it'll be. But any test with like 100 or 200 questions can give you a pretty good idea of your overall personality. I would just take whatever you do. I would just take a Big Five, not a like MBTI or something.
Okay, cool. And is there anything that you're currently working on changing about your own personality, or are you the finished article now?
I feel like it's a constant process of change. So I just moved, and I have to make all new friends in this new location that I'm in, and it's very scary and intimidating. And I have to psych myself up to text people to hang out who I don't know very well. And so that is a change process for me of like, I've definitely been like, oh, I'll just text them tomorrow. I'll just text them another day. Like I've definitely, yeah, uh, kind of chickened out a few times, and it's taken some commitment to extroversion to get me to actually do it.
Okay, just one last thing I forgot to ask earlier. I just wanted to bring up here now is Daniel Gilbert and his whole idea of human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. I think this is such a vital kind of area of research. Like, what are your thoughts on his whole thing about the future self and how we kind of underestimate who we could become, and we sort of think that we're done, you know?
I'm really sorry. It's not as bad as it sounds. It's like actually getting better, but you know how to. Anyway, okay. Yeah. So I love this study, which is where Dan Gilbert and his colleagues asked people, um, young people, how much do you think you're going to change in the coming decades? And they were like, not very much. I'm always going to be like this. And then they asked old people, how much do you think you've changed in the past few decades? And they were like, I've actually changed a lot. Like I've changed this, I've changed that, I've gotten divorced, I've gotten quit drinking, I've quit smoking, I've like got changed careers. So it kind of just goes to show that like we always think we've arrived, like we're at this point now and we're never going to be different. And our preferences now are always going to be the preferences that we have. But when you ask older people, like they actually continued evolving late into, older ages. And I just think it's a really hopeful message because it's like, I don't know, don't assume that you're stuck with whatever you have now or with whatever you're feeling now or um, whatever your preferences are now. You might just decide to do something else or to pursue something else later in your life.
For sure. Well, Olga, I just want to say, I think you said Daniel's work is a very hopeful message. I think the book you've written and the ideas you've put out into the world are like, they are a really hopeful thing to be sharing with people, and it's going to make a big difference in a lot of people's lives. So you should be commended for that, and you've done a great service for people. So thank you very much. Where can people find you online, get the book, and learn more?
Thank you. Thanks. That's so nice. Yeah, you can get me, but better wherever books are sold. And I have a Substack at olgahazan.substack.com. That's where I kind of release material that's kind of related to the book, and some video episodes and things like that. And then I also write for The Atlantic magazine, which is at theatlantic.com.
Thank you, Olga.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, you might also enjoy getting our 7 Insights newsletter. This is a once per month email where I share 7 of the most valuable insights I've uncovered in the previous 30 days. It includes book, podcast, and documentary recommendations, as well as questions and quotes specifically curated to help you live a more creative, intentional, and meaningful life. It currently goes out to over 50,000 subscribers each month. And if you're interested in joining them, you can sign up via the link in the description.